So what is growth? Why are we interested in it? We'll talk about the rule of 70, and then how is it that we can get growth. So what is growth? It's simply an increase in GDP over time, or an increase in GDP per capita over time, depending on which variable we want to look at. Either way, we're growing output somehow. If you remember from microeconomics, you had this production function. How did we show growth in terms of a production function? In the microeconomic sense, we said, right, there's some combination of things that we can produce. We can produce either consumer goods, or we can produce capital goods, or we can produce, in any instance, we can produce some type of good A and some type of good B. And the combination of these goods that we produce, we can represent by a line which we call the production possibilities frontier. Remember this? Kind of like cobwebs breaking, some gears turning slowly, some rust coming off. Right? Production possibilities frontier. Remember, if we were able to use our resources better, or if we were able to get more resources, what we could do is we could expand this production possibility frontier outwards. Right? This production PPF has a particular shape. It is bowed outwards away from the origin. Why was that? Anyone remember that? Yeah. That's correct, yeah. So as we want to do more of one particular thing, the opportunity cost of doing it is increasing. Another way of saying that is to say there's increasing marginal cost. Yeah? In other words, as we devote more and more resources to one thing, what we find is that those resources become less and less good at producing that thing. Okay? So this was economic growth, kind of as you saw it in microeconomics, right? But we can see it now in macroeconomics as something called a production function, where what we've got is some input labor, and here's the output that we generated. So whereas the output that was generated here was some point along the PPF, the output generated in terms of a production function can be read off the y-axis over here. Again, everything that we see, we're going to see again. So for now, you just look at it, you go, okay, cool, and then we'll come back and look at it again. You don't need to understand everything about it yet. Another way that we can show growth in terms of macroeconomics is in terms of this graph, the business cycle. What we see in this stylized graph is that sometimes GDP is going downwards over time, and sometimes it's going up. When it's going up, then we're in an expansion. When it's going down, we're in what's called a recession. But over time, it's generally going upwards, and we'd call that growth. So if we want to look at some real data, here's some real data from the UK. You can see that over time it's going up. Okay, there was a bit of a problem over here. Okay, financial crisis. Yeah. But in general, it's going up over time. Okay? So, why is growth important? What do you think? Any ideas? Why do you think we would have any interest in understanding something about growth? And I mean, if you think about that possibilities frontier, that should give you some kind of indication as to why we potentially might be interested in growth. Any thoughts? Thoughts? Do you want to discuss it? Okay? No? Should I just tell you and then move on? Okay? I will tell you and we will move on, but this is the last time that will happen. From now on, it will be you figuring it out. We already know from economics, from microeconomics, we had this idea that somehow, we think economics is about managing resources or about getting as much as we can from our resources. Right? Now, if we've got a fixed amount of resources in our world in general, the more we can get out of them, the better we can use them, the less the problem of scarcity is an issue. So we have a certain amount of land, we use it for farming. If we can use that land to farm better, we can produce more output from that land, then we don't have to worry too much about the fact that we've only got a limited amount of land, right? So with growth, what it's saying is we're using the resources that we have available to us more efficiently. We're getting more out of what we have available. Which means that then we don't have to worry too much about the issue of scarcity. We spoke a little bit about this idea of GDP being some sort of a measure of well-being. We said it might not be a particularly good one. And I think during the break we'll watch a little bit of a video of a guy talking about this idea of measuring GDP. And instead of measuring GDP, what about measuring GNH, which is gross national happiness, which is done. Okay? There's another aspect though. When we grow, we do, in order to grow, right? One of the concepts that you dealt with in micro was how do you make this thing go out faster? By putting more into capital goods, right? And the more you put into capital goods means the less you put into consumer goods, which means that we have to forego current consumption if we want to grow in the future. Right? We have to put some of what we produce today away into capital in order to produce in the future. There's also the problem of pollution and the fact that we're going to deplete non-renewable resources. As an example, oil, there's only X amount of oil. Estimates sort of say it'll probably last us for I think it's like another 100 years or something. And then there's no more of it. So the faster we grow today, the more that we will use up. Okay, we need to make a plan. Another thing that's happened with growth is that we've had a lot of environmental degradation. And that is potentially problematic. Along with the issue of growth comes what I just called here human issues, which is to say, if we're chasing growth, right? If the focus is on growth, you can think about, say, slavery. You can use a lot of people to do and get a lot out of them in a very short amount of time, and then they die, right? And they live a really rubbish quality of life. Okay? In which case, yes, you've achieved growth, but at what cost in terms of the human perspective? We think about the South African context as well, that's kind of pertinent. There's a big issue surrounding what we should be doing with, say, the resources that we have. Should they be redistributed in some way? Is there potentially an unfair distribution of the resources in our country? Number two, government extracts a lot of the value that is generated by those resources in the form of taxes. What should it do with those taxes? How should it spend that money? Right? Should it use it to build, say, infrastructure, or should it use it to redistribute and give away social welfare, essentially? Right? Obviously, the more capital infrastructure investment, the better for growth. But then the more capital stuff, the less social stuff, right? And the less social stuff, well, now you've got to weigh that up against growth. Which is more important? To have happy people now, or to forego that and just say, it's okay, we'll be happy in the future? Politically, you can see that obviously you need to have some happiness now, so you do need to make those trade-offs.